I'll expand on that actually. That in essence is my story. Energy attached to, energy attached to an object or a home as a repository. As a matter of fact, and I'm not trying to talk about my story, but my story, when you're coming close to the object, they actually gain energy from it, directly from it, unbeknownst to them. It's almost like this passive receptivity that kicks in, this malevolence within people who are kind of receptive that way. So I like the whole concept of the haunted house, but it can be one-dimensional if you don't watch it. You know, there's a house and then the preacher board and oh, here comes a ghost in a sheet. Whereas I think you can have multiple moving parts or multiple levels of depth, and that's kind of what I like about because some people can gain energy, or some entities can gain energy in different forms. As you were saying before, not all ghosts are the same. Some are a memory, some are an energy, some are attached to that chair leg, not the whole chair, something along those lines. So I think the spooky house, in that retrospect, kind of being this repository for energy, that's my genre if there was one for my first work.
This isn't about a house, but in Newport, Rhode Island, there's a tower. It's called Truro Tower, and people don't know how it got there, and there's a lot of theories about it. So that was something that I wanted to incorporate into my book, and in the sequel, it's a portal for people coming from the past and the future to make contact with the people in the present. So it carries the energy that allows people to kind of twist through time. It's not haunted, but it's got something going on.
Yeah, again, sort of bouncing off the house to the ghosts. I know that is a theory in many, paranormal experts, is that if there's especially if there's a violent death, when you think of energy, that the energy during a violent death possibly is what keeps many spirits around. That's one belief. I didn't talk about it, but I do have a real interest in the paranormal. That's what drove me to write, the story that I wrote. And I asked my husband if it'd be okay if I mentioned that he thinks he encountered a ghost once, and in a house, again related to a house, and then found out after he told the owner of the house about his experience that other people had had the same experience in the house, and that there was a Native American graveyard on the property. So, especially when you don't know the history of the place, and then you encounter something, and then find out that maybe there's a link, that really makes you start questioning. So.
I had an experience one time, and we were down in Provincetown on the Cape at a few couples, and we were all staying in this upstairs area. There was a common room, and all three bedrooms were off the common room. And in the middle of the night, I hear my friend's puppy running around back and forth. It was probably 3, 4 in the morning, and it's making a racket out in the common room. And I'm sitting there laying in bed, going, man, we just shut that damn thing up? Eventually, it stopped. I went back to sleep. Well, the next morning, we're sitting around having breakfast, and I look over and I see that the dog crate is actually in the kitchen downstairs. And I said, that's weird. And I said, Bo was running around upstairs last night. And my friend Tyler says, no, he wasn't. Bo was downstairs in the cage, in the kennel, all night long. My friend Amy looks at me and goes, oh my God, I'm so glad you said something. I heard it too. She had to get up to pee, and the poor girl laid there for 3 or 4 hours, terrified out of her mind, staring up at the ceiling, wondering whatever it was out in this room was, causing her this fear. I thought that was really interesting because, again, it's a house, there's some sort of energy there, and it's a very old house. It goes back to like the 1750s. It's been in my friend's family for several generations. So something weird happened there, and it happened that night, and that's my story.
I actually have another one. Unless someone else wants to go, already Vlad.
I was just going to say that you were talking about Stephen King, talking about haunted houses, and you were talking about houses being a repository for energy. One of the things that creeps me out is, what if it's not the house that is the source of the energy for whatever you're seeing or you're feeling or you're hearing? What if it's you, like in The Shining?
Receptivity.
Yes.
I think that
Is feeding off of the boy. They were feeding off of the family that was living in the Overlook. If they hadn't been there, maybe nothing wouldn't have happened. It's the whole, if a tree falls in the forest and there's nobody there, but if there's nobody there in the house, maybe it's not haunted.
The person had the entity, the
So
person.
you show up.
Kind of like how some people just naturally attract trouble.
Named Phillips.
I'm going to take it back to literary horror for a minute. Two of the books growing up that were made into the movie that just really scared the crap out of me was Hell House by Richard Matheson. It was made in the early 70s. I think I was 4 or 5, and my brother took me to see it because my brother loves it. Yeah. And I still remember pretty much all of it. I own the movie. I read the book a couple times. And Shirley Jackson's A Haunting. Phillips, right? So if you haven't read it or seen the movies, well, the movies, so-so. If you're going to see the Jackson movie, go see the original black and white version, not the horrific remake with, I can't think of the actor's name, blonde hair.
I didn't see the remake, I saw the original.
It was awful, but Matheson, Hell House, rent it, read it.
Be scared.
It'd be scared.
And have nightmares.
Absolutely. I watch it every year for Halloween.
I just have one little quick story again about, not a house, but about spirits. So, my son is named after his grandfather on his dad's side.
Polka?
No, that's on my side.
Sight.
I started a thing called Zeitgeist, and then, well, that's another long story. But anyway, so his grandfather died shortly before his wedding, and we took videos of the wedding. And when we went home and played them, there is this image that shows up against the wall throughout the whole reception, and he's wearing, he's like transparent, but he looks like he's wearing a hat, just like my father-in-law wore. And it's really weird. And everybody in the family has looked at it, heard about it, and said, oh, no. And then they look at it, and it's like, oh my gosh, somebody transparent was at that reception.
Back to the house being receptivity, a place. I actually believe more kind of in, it's funny, I don't subscribe, this gets thumbs up, but I don't subscribe to ghosts. I just don't. I do subscribe to energy. And so much, more so than a haunted house, we were talking, but yeah, we've all heard of haunted woods, the whole 9 yards, so there's no real anchor to that location. But I almost see them as almost like poles, like the North and South Pole, that they put out this energy in our Earth's axis. I wonder if on some spiritual level there's poles in certain areas, or something kind of anchors energy to that spot. I was just reading this story, it's mostly the truth is this section of haunted woods right near me, where I live. I've been to those 100 times hunting and fishing, nothing, I've never seen a thing. But these Paranormal Society went up there and they got something. I saw the photo, it looked pretty telling, but you never know, I wasn't there. But I kind of see, more so than an actual structure or a thing, kind of locations there. It's almost kind of in my mind as these poles, the North and South Pole of spirituality, whatever you want to call it, or energy. It's my 2 cents over there.
What's that town in Connecticut that is supposedly this incredibly strange place that's haunted, and there's like no birds and people go in there and they get totally creeped out? Well,
That would lend itself to the whole energy concept.
Yeah,
you know, that
absolutely.
negative energy, just filling, just pushing things away.
I'm actually a ghost.
My hair is a ghost.
My finger just went right through him.
I have a question. How many of you have actually seen something that you would consider a ghost?
I don't know
Guess
what
I
it
did on the
was.
video.
And I hate saying it.
Because,
I don't believe it, I hate saying it.
but,
And there's the guy that writes ghost stories, and I'm not raising my hand.
Do movies count?
No, that doesn't mean that you have-
Imagination at all.
I mean, that doesn't mean you have to have seen one.
I didn't see it, but I was in Rochester, not Rochester, where we're, Buffalo, I was in Buffalo. And there's this haunted mansion in downtown Buffalo that they say has a spirit. I don't believe it. And there's this 3rd floor where they say it really happened. I just happened to be in the end of the 3rd floor. So I just don't believe it. I was through my room and said, look, if you're here, show yourself. Don't rattle any chains or anything. Don't show yourself. They said it's a little girl and she's mischievous. That's what they said. Well, we went out, had dinner, came back to my room, brush my teeth, go to bed in my own, I have a suite, I had my own bathroom in my room. I woke up in the middle of the night, had to go to the bathroom again, and the door was not only close to my bathroom, but it was locked from the inside. I didn't hear it, I didn't see it, I didn't feel anything, but I know I didn't lock my own bathroom door from the inside and close it. I know I didn't. So I said to the room in the pitch black at 3 o'clock in the morning, I was like, you came all the way back from the dead to do this? To do this? To lock me up and go to the bathroom now at 3 o'clock in the morning? But it was, I know I didn't do that. I know I
Don't taunt Happy Fun Ball.
I didn't do it. It happened. I didn't see it, didn't experience it, but I saw the aftermath. That's my
Questions?
experience.
There's always one, right?
One in every crowd.
What's your question?
I actually have a non-horror related question, but it's about writing.
No, it doesn't work.
What do you got?
Dale did it.
How do you approach your story, maybe outline, note-taking? I've always been kind of curious about that with other writers.
I think it depends on the writer. I mean, some people go by a really stringent outline and plan it. Some people go by a really stringent outline and plan it. Me, I kind of have an idea and I have some scenes and I just kind of start writing and I see where it takes me. Usually I have a beginning and an end. How I get from point A to point Z, I don't necessarily know until I start connecting all the dots and whatnot. But there's a lot of ways to do it. Anybody else?
Kind of like Dale, I usually get like Vlad, sorry. I don't outline, I usually have a bullet list in Word, or I'll email stuff to myself from work to my house. I take notes on my phone, I have post-it notes all over my damn house and office at work. I can't outline because I can't plot, but it's just a bulleted list and then I free write everything. And I usually start with writing dialogue and writing the story around the dialogue.
Interesting.
Which is a really stupid way of doing things, but it seems to work.
My ideas come to me when I walk, and I'm a mailman. So I get ideas all the time.
You're already weird.
Yeah. I can't write fast enough, I can't even freehand write fast enough to get everything out. So I have a voice recorder. And most of my customers are used to seeing me parked somewhere in the mail truck with a full gesture, talking to this thing, and then laughing and oh, that's good, and then I'll add something in. As far as outlining, I've tried to outline, and it doesn't work because my characters don't cooperate.
That's right.
I was just telling someone that I sat down to write, recently, months ago, sat down to write a 5,000 to 10,000 word short story about a boy who goes to a carnival. He joins a carnival where things are just wrong. When I actually sat down to write it, page 1, for some strange reason it wasn't a boy, it was twins, which completely changed the entire story. And instead of 5,000 to 10,000 words, it's 106,500 words. And I just finished the first draft of the accidental novel. I didn't mean to. But the interplay between the twins, it completely, the setup's exactly the same, the situation that they're in is exactly the same, but there's two of them and it made it massively different. So I don't really, very, very rough outline, and then it just kind of goes where it goes.
Yeah, that's a great question because there's two main groups that writers usually put themselves into: the pantsers, which are seat of the pants people who just start writing, and plotters. And a lot of people have one method or the other. I sometimes use both, and it depends on the type of story it is. I've started a story with nothing more than a title before, or just a character name, or one scene, something. And when you write, you have to access the subconscious. When you want to get really good writing, the things that scare you, they're buried. And you have to access that, and that's when you can't actually plot that stuff out. Oh, I'm going to write a scene right here about this. Sometimes you can do that, but what it is for a lot of us, I think, is we get scraps, and we kind of put them together. This scrap hooks with this scrap. This piece of dialogue hooks with this scene. This character needs to go here and do something. That kind of thing. So it's an organic. At a certain point, a lot of my books then suddenly have enough meat in them to start plotting them, start putting them into a spreadsheet actually, and see what comes before what. Because if you've got a really tight plot in a very big book, you've got to know what's going on, or otherwise you can get very lost.
Mm.
So, like, throw out a few thousand words.
Been done it, yeah.
No one's ever thrown out a couple thousand words here.
So
That's the order.
I probably have the worst discipline for anybody to be a writer, and the way I ended up writing my book, I had this one sentence in my head, I call myself Earth Girl, and that started the whole thing. And I live in a 4-generational household, and I take care of a lot of people. I went away for a week, and I wrote constantly from like 7 in the morning till 7 at night. I had no idea where the story was going. I just wrote every day. I was totally in the zone. Felt like 2 hours would go by each day. It didn't at all feel like, a whole day. I did that in 1 week, and then I had to go back home and work and take care of everybody again. So I had to wait a whole nother year to be able to finish the book. And so I would call myself on the phone. I'd be in the car and I'd get an idea, and my poor husband would come home and I'd be saying, so the part where da-da-da-da, and that was how I kept, track of my ideas. I went back the next year, exactly a year later, wrote for a week and finished the book, and then the year after that, I did revisions and found a publisher. But I wouldn't recommend that because it makes it take a really long time, but for me, that getting right into the zone and just writing, just really, it makes it all flow.
Yeah, that's actually one of the number one questions that especially budding writers ask, along with what's your schedule? And I always feel like I'm disappointing writers when I say I have no schedule, and I rarely outline, and I rarely plan. For me, the beauty of writing and why I love it, and I refuse to do it as a job, I don't take it away from people who do it. I admire people who do it for a job. I can't do it that way because it would become work for me. I love it. I do it when I'm inspired, which makes me not a very prolific writer, but I like to think that it helps avoid, in some cases, the formulaic. And for me, it's all about voice. And like all the other writers here, I get the scraps of ideas, bits of dreams, something you hear, something that inspires you. It starts with inspiration. But then I sit on it for a while, and I wait until I hear the voice. Because for me, each character, each story is about a character, and my main character, and I have to wait, and sometimes I walk. And actually, by the way, I've heard a lot of writers actually purposely become male carriers so they can, have that kind of...
I was ahead of the game.
Yes. It's supposed to be sort of a perfect job where you can do your job, but,
As long as you have two customers taking your praise.
There's a lot of people, a lot of writers will do that. They will walk also. It's the repetitiveness of that. It's almost like a meditation thing. But yeah, I wait until I start hearing it's often the first line of the story or the novel, novella, whatever. And when I start hearing the person speaking, then I'm like, okay, I've got it now. Now I can sit down and write. And sometimes I also will know where I'm ending, but the beauty of it is I don't know what's going to happen in the middle. Yeah. And that's to me the beauty of it. I'm not outlining and, just going with it and seeing where the character goes.
I myself do a very simple outline. I do literally per chapter one sentence. One sentence, and you'll see that you add chapters, and that chapter might not be there by the time you're done writing the whole 9 yards. But I was just at a reading with Wally Lamb not too long ago. He just starts to write. He calls it his journey. He has no end point in mind. He just starts to write, and he'll follow wherever it went. I don't know about you guys with research, but for me, I know I wanted to express something. I was looking up something one time just to corroborate what it was, and the research begot storyline. And the storyline kind of begot more research, and it lended validity and more of a foundation to what I was writing. And that really evolved a lot of storyline. And when the creativity comes, you just got to kind of flow. I've got to flow with it. I don't know what you folks do, but once it's coming, don't quell it. Oh no, I got to finish this chapter this day. Kind of roll with it where it's going. And that's what worked for me. But you got to find out what works for you, and to her, you got to find your voice. Who here has done voices? Like my wife will hear me working out a scene in the bathroom, in the shower.
Yeah.
I come downstairs, she's like, so who are you right now? Oh, I'm Jessica, and she's just gonna know. Oh no, I'm Dale, and
Who are you talking to upstairs?
That's it. Well, she doesn't even ask that anymore. She wants to know who I am coming down the
He's
steps.
going down the stairs. Yeah, I love research. Research really helps me.
It expands the
Fill in
story.
details, expands it, and it will lead to other things. And
Oh,
in
absolutely.
some cases, even other stories. I was doing research for one story and came across something.
So,
It's like, wow, that's a great idea for another story. So definitely use research, even if you have a very basic kind of a story. Push it a little further and do some research into details, smells, sounds, history of the place, and that'll really beef up your stories.
In terms of research, one of the great things about being a writer is that research can be reading fiction. I can't stress that enough. One of the things, I'm working on a novel and the main character is actually a hyper-intelligent, genetically engineered German Shepherd. So for research, I got to read again, The Call of the Wild, White Fang, Cujo, and also websites that are all about dogs, dog facts, what they're like,
That's what that little barking was.
a little bit.
Rewatchers by
Yeah, Watchers is another excellent one.
Watchers.
The best
Written
kids book, in my opinion, is probably Watchers.
His dog.
For sure.
So that's one of the fun parts of the research aspect. It doesn't all have to be nonfiction, although nonfiction definitely helps.
Nonfiction, I used to done
I'm gonna pass this to the lady.
Oh, I'm sorry.
One of the things I've done helpful now is I'm definitely a pantser. And when I'm done, I tend to have a lot of words in a big manuscript. So I'm going through it, manuscript chapter by chapter. I'm going to discard after I've written it, saying one sentence what happens with an arrow to show whether the action is up, goes down, or stays the same. So I can kind of plot where I need to make things move faster, where I need to make things move more slowly, and where I can cut. And one of the things, it sounds really silly, but one of the things that really helped me was we watch a lot of Pixar movies in our house. And we have watched The Incredibles maybe 7 or 8 times. And I found at least maybe 10. I found on the extras, there's an interview with Brad V, and he talks about his idea for the movie and what he really wanted it to be. And then he talks about all the things the other animators made him cut out. And he sounds so sad. And he actually says, this scene was my favorite. This is the scene I really loved. And it's a beautiful scene, and they actually kind of mocked it up and they show it. But it dragged the action down too much. And I found that really interesting and inspirational how they chose which scenes to keep in and which to because there are things that I like that I love, that I think are really interesting, but they don't add anything to the action of the story.
Kill your darling.
Those darlings, and then hopefully when you watch it, they'll come back to us.
As far as research, I need to not do any research until I'm done, or do as little research as possible until I'm done, because I'm a poster boy for ADHD, and I will look up something, and then, oh look, a link, and I will go to that, and oh look, a video, and I will go to that, and 2 hours passes, and I know a whole bunch about something that has nothing to do with the story, but it was a link, and I found it fascinating, and now I know all about that, and what was it? And it's done. I try to get through the story, and I leave, if there's something that I know that I don't know, I leave a little note, look this up. And then later on, when I do something called a wraparound, I will just go through until the end, and then go right back to the beginning while the story's still in my head. And now that I know the characters, because I didn't know them before, I'll start at the beginning and try to make everything mesh up. And that's when I'll start looking things up, because the whole story's down, and I can kind of pick what is the important stuff to look up, and what is just, hey, that's shiny.
So,
Sorry.
Right back quick. One of the best things for writers is to have a keen sense of curiosity. That's, I think, a lot of us love doing research at certain times. If it's not holding the story up, yeah, or if it's after the fact, but sometimes your research corroborates what you've written down there, and that's the best, because they say write what you know, but it's not really as simple as that. You're imagining, like, none of us have space traveled, at least I don't think so, but we still write things like that. None of us have taken on a psychotic killer, but, we still write things like that. But it's having that sense of imagination, that sense of curiosity about other people's lives. I mean, we're eavesdroppers. If you see us at a coffee house, guess what we're doing? We're listening to the
People
conversations
watching.
around us.
People
People
watching.
watching. Oh yeah. Their mannerisms. Oh, there's a character I can use. Oh, look at that tall person over there. I could use that. Well, listen. What is that? What are they talking about? And it's a terrible habit to have, but it really helps when you're a writer.
So I just wanted to say that some of it depends on what kind of thing you're working on. So now I'm doing something which will be real different for me because I'm writing a true story about a young man who was a victim of a hit-and-run driver and was seriously brain injured, and his journey back. But that's going to be a very different kind of thing where I'm interviewing him, and yet his perception of this whole story is very different from his mother's perception of it because she experienced it in a whole different way than he did. He actually was unconscious for 2 months almost. So for me, this is a new thing, but also just any advice to a writer, a lot of it depends on what you're trying to do. I want to tell his story, but I want to get the information. I'm talking to the people who treated him in the hospital, in the rehab. So as far as voice, it's not going to be my voice in this. It's going to be his story and really his voice, but through all of these other people who watched him. He's very inspirational. He has really come back and struggled, but has definitely prevailed. So that'll be a whole different type of thing.
Guys, I apologize, I have to cut, but I want to say thank you very much to everybody tonight. I do appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve.
I'll be seeing some of you on Tuesday.
Yeah, I'll see you tomorrow.
Tewksbury Library. If
Tewksbury
people want to
Library.
come see us again, they can come in a few days.
Sorry to cut early, but I do have to get home. Thank you very much, guys, I appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve.
I have a question for you. Many of you said that you have worked on compilation books and have co-written stories with other authors. I have an idea for a horror story, and I'm looking for someone to work on it with me. How did you find the people that you worked with?
Well, Dale and I are in a anthology called Insanity Tales, which we discussed earlier tonight. And we actually met organically at England Authors Expo a few years ago.
Yeah,
Um,
my first show
and
there.
we read each other's work, we liked what we saw, and we struck up a friendship, which ended up being great for moving forward, learning, professionalism in all its categories. So that's kind of how we started. I mean, that's really the only collaborative project that I've done so far. While we do work together, promote, all as a group, we all have to support each other and whatnot. That's my experience.
But he's expressed the idea of us co-authoring a story.
Right,
At some
right.
point, which we have not done. It's like, well, that would be kind of fun. You just kind of go back and forth and do that. So that's something we could explore.
And Scott, you have a lot of experience with anthologies and being the NAHW, so if you want to speak to that point.
Sure. I've actually co-written 3 books with my brother, all nonfiction. He's the workhorse of it because I work full-time, and there's a lot of going back and forth on instant messengers, a lot of phone calls, there's a lot of praying for death on both sides, I'm sure. Anthology-wise, I've edited.
Referenced earlier about the genetically engineered dog, has 4 titles right now. My last publication called The Button, for some reason that just hit me, and that was the title I started with, and that was the title that ended up being ultimately published. So I think it really depends on the work and what it demands. Sometimes a story, you have a good story, or you think you have a good story, and the title is kind of just in the background. It's the least important thing until you get the actual manuscript developed to the point that it's at a professional level. Anybody else?
I'm actually really awful with titles. I don't name my story until I'm actually done with it. My novel Trailer Trash, someone suggested that name to me because I had no clue what the name of the story. The original book was called Vamps, which was just stupid. It was based on a short story I wrote called Trailer Trash, so it seemed appropriate to call the novel Trailer Trash, but
Which takes place in the trailer park, right?
a little bit of it in the trailer park, stuff's up in the trailer park. But when I had the book done, I was like, what do I name this thing? Like, I'll call it Vamps. Like, no, you won't. That's a bad Robert Downey Jr. movie with Grace Jones and some other people that were awful in it. And just name it after your short story, so that seemed right.
Well, maybe your next book should be about bad movies. You seem to.
Oh, we would love that.
There are so many of those out right now, it's not even funny.
We do panels at some conventions which do that. They take like a series of bad movies and say, oh, this is just so awful.
And then, I name the story last usually, and I'm in some kind of panic because I'm under a deadline for it. So then whatever sounds good at the time, I just kind of slap it on there and send it up and hope they like it.
Okay.
I'm also terrible at titles. They're awful. I'll occasionally have one that hits me that it sticks and it winds up being perfect, but it's always an accident. And I'm always second-guessing myself and asking other people, what do you really think about this? Is this okay? And usually they just give me this wide-eyed look like, how can I tell them this sucks? But every once in a while, I get this little gem that they're like, oh, that's good. But I have no idea how it works. Everything that I write, I want to, right at the top, it says, whatever it is, working title. Because it's going to be a working title until somebody tells me it's not.
Mine are all called stuff and a date.
Well, I'm actually the reverse of them. Sometimes the title is the first thing to come because that determines what comes after. For my mystery series, everything is a phrase taken from literature. A memory of grief is from the Epic of Gilgamesh. A fall from grace is from the Bible. A certain slant of light from Emily Dickinson. And that determines part of the theme of what the book is about and where it goes, where the protagonist goes in a journey. One just came from a writing prompt in our writing group. They said, we should all write a story called The Easiest Man to Kill. And I'm like, oh, you've got to write a story like that. So you just take that title off and start playing with it and see what you can do. I had another story that was about giant lobsters taking over the world, and I had no idea what to call it. I was just like, what do you do with it? I didn't know how to finish the story. It was just, okay, so they come out and then what? And a friend of mine said, you have to call it God Save the Queen. And I looked at him and went, why? He says, I don't know, but you have to. And I thought about it and I went, that's what I need. And that was the title that let me finish the story with that. So you just never know. Different writers work with different pieces. Sometimes it comes to you at the start, determines where you're going to go. Sometimes you've got a story, and that's what matters. And then you say, well, now what do I call it? I mean, you could probably ask songwriters the same thing. What's the title of your song? And they're like, oh, man, that's the worst.
Black Dog by Led Zeppelin. They didn't know what to call the story. They were hanging out in the parking lot having a cigarette break. The black dog went to the parking lot. That's what they named the song.
They didn't know what to call their album.
Liz, you have a title story.
I had a great, it took me a really long time to write my first book, like 6 years. And I had a great story at the beginning of it, because my story is about kind of the space between the living and the dead, and the house is set in a place where they find the setting. It's between the end of the day and the beginning of night. And my title that I held on for 6 years was Twilight.
Oh.
And then we moved from Connecticut to Massachusetts, and I had another, I found all the synonyms, and my characters are German, and I found that another name that means something very similar. And about a week before I sent it out to my agent, a restaurant opened up called Eventhal. So, but I thought I had this name first, and I didn't want to.
Actually, yeah, I've got one too.
There used to be a restaurant in Bradford called Eventhal, and you could close.
Yes.
I had a problem with Shadow of the Wendigo because if you look on keywords, sometimes all the titles are taken around it. Cry of the Wendigo, Night of the Wendigo, Hunt of the Wendigo, everything was taken, and I had to come up with Shadow, which was not taken. Nowadays, some writers actually look at what is going to come up in a Google search for keywords, because sometimes other titles have been used, and you don't want your book being confused with something else like Twilight, and sometimes you can find something distinct that will apply to it.
I know of someone who actually they found out that they accidentally named their main character after a serial killer that they didn't know about, that they'd never heard of.
Then they're
And then they had to go through and change the entire thing because they didn't want that association.
Moral of the story, Google is your best friend.
Yeah. In my case, my short story collection, I had also had a working title, which was Champagne Water. And one of the problems you have when you get published by a publisher is you lose control. And that's why some people actually elect to self-publish, because they have more control over their product. So often it's the marketing department if it's a large house. Luckily, Liz's publisher let her keep her title. I got published with a small press publisher, And he had another book on his list that had water in it, so he didn't want another book that had champagne water in it. Plus my writing is on the dark side, so he thought that sounds a little too literally bubbly. So how about one of the stories in the collection is Where the Dog Star Never Glows. And so, you know, I did a little, this is another thing you can do, is you send out a little poll to your friends and say, which do you like better, and see what they go with, and everybody picked that. But what I didn't anticipate was how hard it was going to say when I was being introduced. And I've heard everything from Where the Dog Star Never Grows to Where the Dog Star Never Blows. So if I ever reissue this book, I will be changing the title back to Champagne Water. So there are certain things to consider, is, you know, in terms of, you know, making it easy for people to say the title.
I wanted to call my book Earth Girl, but it turned out that about 2 months before mine came out, my publisher informed me, well, there's another book that just came out that's called Earth Girl, and they said, you know, if you want to keep the same title, you probably could, but so it became, I call myself Earth Girl, which really is fine, because that's the first sentence, and, you know, it works. But for a moment there, I was pretty upset. I've been asked to turn this into a screenplay, and they don't want to use that title, I think because...
Earth Girls are easy.
Right, that's the reason.
That's what keeps running through my head every time.
So, the working title for the screenplay is The Girl with Golden Eyes. Now, I think that just reminds me of the girl with the dragon tattoo, and I don't know if that's going to be the title, but
GoldenEye.
that's what they're... That's, yeah, so who knows? It's a problem to find one you like, one that represents the story well, and then that somebody hasn't already used. So.
Great questions.
Any more questions?
I think that's it.
That's good.
That's
So,
it.
thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Well,
Thanks for
thank
coming.
you, Chris.
All right.
That's it.
And I'm still a person.
Anyway.